Hey guys, it's SD, your host of the Life Picks Relationship podcast, where people with all sorts of backgrounds, challenges, and life experience show us how they make their relationship extraordinary. Hey guys, hope you're having an awesome day and discovered where you should start if you want to improve your relationship. You know what that is? Yourself. I'm super excited for today's guest, an international award-winning author, speaker, and holistic health coach, Dr. Gill Barham. Thank you so much, Dr. Gill, for being here. We're going to get straight to it. You've been married for 38 years, which is a really long time compared to the statistics of over 50% people getting divorced. And I have a personal feeling it's higher since COVID. I don't know, but I just think that. How are you able to do it?
Well, just let me correct.
Are able to do it?
We are still married for now. I've actually been with my husband for 38 years. We've been married for 34. We got married in 1985, I think.
Okay.
I remember.
Been together for 38 years, and I think married for 34 is also really long.
I was 21. I met him when I was 21, and I'm now 59.
Okay.
It has been a very long time. And it's amazing to think that it's been such, when you look at it in those terms, you think, I can't believe even 38 years has gone past in any sense, let alone in being with somebody and married to somebody for all that length of time. It seems ridiculous, really, because I don't feel nearly 60, of course. But anyway, to ask you, how do we do it? Well, I suppose it's a combination of things. It's a combination of setting an intention in the first place that, what we did 34 years ago was going to be for life. There is a massive amount of flexibility and compromise within such a long relationship, and there's also a lot of mutual respect, I would say. So I think those are the three main themes, if you like, that if you pushed me I would think about.
Okay, so let's go back to those three. You have this intention, this is the guy I'm with for life. Did you ever have at any point like maybe I should get divorced or I can't stand him or any such stuff?
Oh, every day.
Are you still married?
No, I've never thought that we would get divorced. I mean, I'm not saying that anybody goes into a marriage without the intention of staying with each other for a lifetime. And I suppose, it was the 1980s when we got married. Times have really changed, haven't they? In those days, it was less acceptable, really, to get divorced. And I'm not talking from any kind of Christian or religious perspective. It just, people just didn't do it. And I'm not sure doing what I do now, and particularly working, some of my charitable work, my humanitarian work is around domestic violence, that actually the last thing that I would be saying to men or women in those circumstances is to stay in a relationship that wasn't working for them. And I have really good first-hand experience of that, because looking back and in hindsight's a wonderful thing, isn't it? In retrospect, my mother actually stayed in what was not a healthy relationship until she died. And so I suppose it depends really on the luck of the draw. I mean, I was only 21. My husband was 29 when we got together. And so I was really quite young. When you now look at girls, I don't know how old you are, but, I look at my own daughters who are now 31 and nearly 26, and my son's 28. They are with partners, but they are not married and actually might not marry. I think if they do marry, it's because of us. They will do it because of us, because we're kind of slightly old-fashioned about it.
You want them to marry the person that they're with now because of you?
Not because of me. No, I want them to get married because they want them to get married. I think there's a big part of us that are going, oh, let's have a big party, because we didn't have the big traditional white wedding with the church, and we didn't do all of that. It wasn't about that when we got married. And I know that a lot of couples, and particularly women, have this airy, the fancy ideas about their ideal day. I never had that. I didn't get married in a white wedding dress. I got married in a little short Primrose Frank Usher number. And that was the only thing I think that my dad paid for. We paid for everything else. And so it's not really about that, but I think they would probably put pressure under themselves, knowing us, that they kind of wouldn't want to disappoint us. But, for example, my son's girlfriend, her parents never got married. And so she comes at it from a very different perspective, of course. So to be honest, if they don't get married, then that's fine. But I think things are less complicated here financially when you are married. there are certain things that are easier to manage when you've got this little piece of paper, even if you don't take up the same name. And we've certainly got people of our age that have recently got married in their 50s and 60s, just because it makes that whole process slightly more easy.
Okay, so you're saying then it was like the society and just the way things happen.
Yeah.
Now, how were you able to be flexible and not feel like you're always giving in?
It's a good question, because I am a bit of a people pleaser. You know, although my first degree was in music, you know, I'm a trained singer. I became a nurse when I was 25, something like that. And you don't go into that profession unless you're a bit of a people pleaser, really, unless you really want to help people out, and a bit of a mother figure, you know. And so it's something that I've had to challenge myself more with as I've got older. And that's something that my husband has probably struggled with, particularly in the last maybe 6 years, since going through the menopause, and there's a reason for that, and if you want to know what that is, I'll tell you later, because things change in terms of the way you approach things because of your hormones level changing, but also because, you know, the family's gone and they're less dependent on me as being the person at home that kind of keeps everything together, but also because as my business has grown and the way that my own kind of a journey into kind of some a spiritual awakening has happened, I am much more confident and much more vocal about what I want. And so although I still compromise, I think my husband has had to compromise slightly more over the last 6 years, seeing me change into the woman that I am now. And I think the changes are positive, and I think he agrees with that. But actually it's not easy for him, because we've always had the kind of this relationship that has just slightly been tweaked.
Like learning a different dance.
Yeah, it's playing a different dance. But I think it's tweaked anyway, because of course for the first, I don't know, 7 years of our relationship was just two of us. And then the first baby came along when I was 28. So that's a very different dance, of course. And then it tweaked again when I gave up work to look after the children and became a full-time mum, although I always did loads and loads of other things. That tweaked. And that was the sort of norm for a long time, until 2007, when I went back to working outside of the house to a formal job. That was another little tweak. And then when I had to give up that job and then start my own business, there you go again. But of course he's had his as well, where he's basically been the major breadwinner for all this time. But also I know, and he knows, that I'm also a kingmaker, which is, I think, is a lovely phrase, which means that he wouldn't have been able to have been as successful and to done all of the things that he did with having a family without my support.
Sure, that's a relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I have a lovely friend actually who's in America at the moment with his American wife in Atlanta, and he's just become a dad. They've become parents, and he is the stay-at-home dad. The baby's 1, and they came to see us fairly recently, and he said, this is really hard work. It's like a baby thing, isn't it? And I went, yeah. He said, it's full on, isn't it? And I went, yeah. Yeah, and I didn't have anybody to help, you know. There was nobody around us. You know, my mother wasn't alive, and my father was miles away, and we just did it all on our own, you know. And he's got his in-laws very close to him, so and of course that's a big reason. I think I mentioned to you that just briefly that we're moving, and one of the reasons that we're moving north is that we are going to be with our grown-up children, because we're hoping to be grandparents, you know, within a couple of years maybe. So I want to be there and ready to do what my mother could never do for me.
So you're giving to them what you missed out on. You're awesome. Now, if somebody else, right, is going through this change, because everybody at some point will, could you give them like one piece of advice they could do to pivot and be flexible in this new situation?
I think it's one of the things which I find really difficult to do, actually, but it's about setting boundaries. So it's very easy, isn't it, to fall into this sort of day-to-day routine. And then when things change on either side, it's very common for you to just expect things to stay the same. When actually, if somebody's got a new job or is in a different situation, for example, my husband retired at the end of March. So there's another twist again, another change. So it's about actually saying, okay, so we've got a new norm, and we're in this difficult situation here in that, you know, we've obviously had lockdown. My husband retired at the end of March. We went into lockdown on the 23rd of March. His brother died a couple of months or so later. So there's a huge amount of change for him in the last few months. And so although my gut is saying, okay, so we need to set some new boundaries and some new rules here, being flexible, I'm flexible enough to know that now's not the time, that actually there's too many changes for him that have gone on. His best friend and his brother has died. He's lost his job. He's 67. So this is however many 47 years that he has been a very prominent and important and respected man in his field. And then for COVID to happen on top of all of that, it's just too many changes. So for me to expect things to kind of have this new, here we go, is unreasonable. So I think it's that realization that setting boundaries, but actually timing is everything. I think for me is really important to know about.
Yeah, it's taking everything into consideration, understanding yourself, understanding your partner, and seeing like, okay, what do we have to do here now? Yeah. Now, before we go on to the mutual respect aspect, you said about the menopause, how it's harder for your husband.
Yeah. So what's really interesting is that when you hit the perimenopause, which most women do in their 40s, 1 in 100 will go through the menopause and hit perimenopause in their 30s, and some in their 20s. But 99% of us will start having perimenopausal changes in our 40s. And so what basically happens is that we get this fluctuation in hormones, and particularly estrogen, and this estrogen basically just falls until it just pales off. Some of us, like me, had what's called a surgical menopause because I had an operation when I was 45, which sent me headlong into the menopause, in which case, instead of the curve being gradual, it kind of dips. And the thing about estrogen is that it helps us be patient. It helps us be mothers. It helps us be empathetic. It helps us to stay up until 4 o'clock in the morning with a child that's vomiting. And to deal with all of the ins and outs of being a parent. It helps us to manage all of the emotion. If we were driven by testosterone largely, we know that men tend to be less patient and more aggressive and more quick to react. It's all hormonal. So does it make sense to you then that as these hormones drop, and estrogen particularly drops, and we withdraw from estrogen, is that actually we become less that kind of nurturing, mothering, patient? Because we don't need to be. By the time we get to 50, whether it was 2,000 years ago or now, or physiologically, we haven't changed. We'd be dead. We'd be dead by 52, 1,000 years ago. But here we are living probably a third and sometimes half of our life as a woman without this important hormone of estrogen. And so one of the things that happens is that you'll find a lot of women get angry. They'll say, I can't cope with this because I'm just getting angry. And of course, their men are seeing this woman that they've probably their queen they've been married to for 2 years or 20 years or whatever, basically changing in personality, because all of a sudden she's going, you can write off because I'm not putting up with that anymore. And it's not necessarily them, it's just the fact that our tolerance levels reduce because we are not bathed in what you lovely girl are bathed in, which are these wonderful sex hormones that keep you looking and feeling beautiful and also very kind of passionate.
So what could you do in your 20s or 30s to prepare you for this menopause phase?
Well, that's a lot of my work actually, is about educating and empowering women to learn about it now, because it was never talked about. It's still really not talked about. And most women don't realise that actually it's going to hit them as early as it does. For example, the birth rate now, I think there are more women having children over the age of 40 than under the age of 20. Life has changed. Women want to have their careers. My daughter's no different. I don't know when she's going to have children. She's already 31. The trouble with this is that physiologically our bodies haven't caught up in terms of how we were ancestrally. So the best age of having a baby still physiologically is 18. Purely physiologically, the earlier we have children, the easier it is, or the more ideal it is. Because we look much younger, and there are all sorts of things that we're doing in terms of our nutrition and the way we live our lives, that means that, whatever other help you might choose to have, it means that although we might look younger physiologically, we're still in a situation where hormonally the body is kind of beginning to shut down. And so what we need to be able to do is to inform women for that, and so that they can make those decisions about having their families from an informed place. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So now back to the third thing that you said was the mutual respect My question is, what comes first, the love or mutual respect?
Love, definitely. Love and lust, actually, of course. Yeah, love, definitely. But it is quite interesting. I remember my first conversation with my husband, because we met through mutual friends, and we'd been at a barbecue at their house one day, and we got a lift in the back of the car. And my husband had been windsurfing that day with a friend of his, and he actually was like a lobster. He was so red because he hadn't put enough sun cream on, and he was bright red. And he sat in the back of the car with me, and kind of, he'd noticed me sitting at this barbecue, and he looked around and he said, "So what do you do?" Rather rudely and abruptly, actually. And I said, "Well, I'm a singer." And he went, "Are you any good?" And I went, "Well, some people think so." Anyway, a few weeks later, I was at university at the time, and I was finishing up my music degree. And in the town, or the city that I did my degree, which is in Norwich, which is right over in the east of England, there was a 400-year celebration, a Quater centenary celebration going on. And there was a whole week of concerts. And I was asked to start the whole thing off and give the inaugural concert. And I'd said to my husband Peter, and I said, "I'm giving this concert thing. Do you want to come? It's at lunchtime." He said, "Well, I could probably get off work, And I said, "Well, I'll meet you in the local pub," because it was just up the road from where I was going. And I turned up in this gold, sort of black and gold outfit, quite posh. And he kind of went, "Oh, okay." He obviously got the idea then that it's maybe a little bit serious.
Was he like wearing jeans or something?
Well, he was in work gear, fortunately, because I think if he'd turned up in jeans, he might have been a little bit embarrassed. So he walked me into this concert venue, and there was a harpsichord, because I specialised in a lot of early music, so things like Vivaldi and Bach and Purcell. And there was this harpsichord, and the guy sitting at the harpsichord, and this guy stood up. He tells this story a lot, by the way. This guy stood up and said, "Welcome to the Quest Centenary, and this is our inaugural concert, and we're very happy to have Gillian Wells," that was my maiden name. And I started singing this Purcell song, which remarkably is called The Blessed Virgin's Expostulation. Who knew? And my husband says, he sat at the back of the hall, and he kind of went,
Mouth just open.
mouth just open. And of course, from that moment, although my life has not been professionally about music, I was a semi-professional singer for a little while before I really I struggled to be a singer with having small children. I've always sung either classical or folk, or I play a lot of bluegrass, actually, American bluegrass music. And so he's always, the respect that he's had for me, particularly around my voice and my talent, is obvious. And that certainly helps. But there is also an element too of when I first met him, he was quite shy, and I'm very outgoing and quite an extrovert. You have to be if you're going to stand on stage. And the one thing that he liked about me was that I could walk into any room and kind of introduce myself, and he always found that really difficult. And so he would struggle to speak to somebody unless he'd been formally introduced. So one of the things that I was able to do for him was to say, "Peter, come over and you need to meet so-and-so." And then he'd be fine and chatter away all night. But as his confidence grew, he kind of wanted to be the centre of attention. And so there was, and there still is sometimes actually, where there is this conflict. And particularly when he started playing music himself, I think it was, if you can't beat them, join them, is that there are times when he actually is quite envious, I think, of me being the centre. And I know that there's a big part of this as well, actually, of course, she's the professional musician. But so there is this kind of little bit of give and take in it. And that has caused moments of, from my point of view, of friction. And that is difficult for me. That is compromise. And I think it's one of those things where one of the things that we've tried to do is we do an awful lot together. And there are just times when you kind of need to do things apart from each other. And I think moving to our new house, we're going to have this whole new life. And that's going to be one of those things that we're going to need to do, is to find things that we will do separately and things together. But, we will need to establish those kind of things.
For sure. So he respects you, or his respect started for sure with your voice and your singing.
Yeah.
At what point did you start respecting him, and what was that about?
He's a very nice man, and everybody loves him. him. And he's very bright, super bright, very knowledgeable, retains a lot of information. I mean, you wouldn't know.
Feel like not stupid, but like really not smart next to him.
No, I don't feel really not smart, because I have other talents. I'm really logical, and so I can always see a problem, and he'll come to me and he'll say, what about this? And he goes, oh yeah, I knew you'd solve that. We're just as smart in very different ways. So he's more smart academically in that he can remember names of plants and stuff, because he's a biologist, so why wouldn't he? So he's smarter in a different way, whereas I'm much more practical and logical, and I think that's why we work so well together, is because we are intellectually fairly well matched, but we also are not necessarily competing with each other all the time. And I really respect him for his dedication to, he's a Cancerian, whether you believe in that or not. Cancerians are really family people, and that's what he's always been so wonderful about, is supporting his family. And we've had some really hard times, financially hard times, and he has had to support the family pretty much on his own for many, many years. It's difficult when you have 3 children for both parents to be working, and we made the decision that we'd rather not go on holiday and have me at home than for us both to be working and have a little bit more money to spend. It's a personal decision, and I'm not saying that that's not everybody's choice. So my respect for him is also based around his work. I mean, he's extremely well respected. He's almost kind of unique in his field, and he's retired, but people are still phoning him up and saying, can you just do this?
Never gonna fully leave.
Yeah. And a friend of his said, look, you need a big box in the centre of the room with a hole in it that says no. So when somebody says something, you just get this piece of paper and you go, no. So yeah, he's very loving. He's a very dedicated man to his family and to his work, and also he's very, we love nature. He's a biologist, so he taught me to fish. We do a lot of walking. We love the dog. We live at the moment in the middle of nowhere in the English countryside. He is definitely my best friend, and one of the lovely things about it is that he is one of the least judgmental people where I'm concerned. So even though I fiddle faddle about and try things out, because I'm a real early adopter, I'll have a go at anything, he just kind of rolls his eyes and goes, oh, okay.
Okay, so let's you be in to do what you want to do.
No, I mean, in a way, there are times when it's frustrating because he never asks me, what's your day been? I mean, I always talk about his day, and this has been the last 38 years, so what did you do today? And he'll tell me everything about what he did today. And if I get one question, I'm lucky, because he's never, I don't know whether it's a man thing or whether it's just him. On occasion I'll say, would you like to know about my day? And he'll go, oh, yeah, okay. And I start talking about it, and then he's off, he's distracted. But there is an advantage to that as well, because it means I can pretty well do what I want.
Yeah.
Without him saying, well, where are you going? And what have you done today? And blah, 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 blah.
There's that trust there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a trust about it. And that gives me this kind of certain autonomy, which is, I don't really want to be telling you what I'm doing, actually, because you wouldn't understand it, because I spend my time with a lot of woo-woo people. But he doesn't get any of that. So it means I can be in that space without feeling that I need to justify it. That makes sense?
Yeah, I love that. Okay, how do you deal with challenges when they actually come up?
Well, my way of dealing with it has changed, I think. He's a real worrywart. He lies awake at night worrying. And I get really concerned about that. I mean, we were talking about it the other day, that our son-in-law is now in the position that he's in, that Sunday night was horrendous for him because he's worrying about, the working week, and all of that strain and stress has gone, obviously. So, for example, through our married life, I learned just small things like I would never book an evening out on a Friday, because I would know that by Friday he was full. There was nothing left for anybody, and that if we wanted to do anything with anybody or go anywhere, Friday night was a big no-no. So there are small things like that. But
actually, learn to understand him and how you should deal with it to even prevent those challenges from happening.
Yes, because if I put him in that situation, it wasn't ever going to go well. None of us would have a nice time. It was partly selfish as well, of course, because I realised that if we did go out on a Friday night, then he'd be too tired, or maybe he'd drink too much, and then he'd get cranky, and so I wasn't having. I don't want to do that, thanks. But it was mostly from his point of view. But in terms of big things, when things have happened and there've been dramatic things, when you have children, it's inevitable. Actually, I'm the really emotional one, that breaks down and, you know, takes ages to get over something. But he's got a different personality for me. So in terms of human design, I'm a doer, but he's an architect in terms of his human design, which is why everybody wants him to come and run their meetings for him, because he can see the bigger picture. He knows the gaps. He can see what needs to be done. That's what he does. He's not a doer. He's not interested in detail. And so when I started working with a friend of mine and understanding our human design, it kind of all made sense, really, is that he'll have the idea, or I'll have the idea, give it to him so it's his idea, and then it'll get done. And then I do it. So, for example, we were talking about, we have a narrowboat. Do you know what a narrowboat is?
No.
It's like a barge on the canal. It's a very narrow barge, long barge. And we were talking about having it extended, so you can basically chop it up, put a bit in, stick it back together, and it makes it longer.
Yeah.
So this is just one example. So he was talking about, we need a bigger boat, and we looked for bigger boats and we couldn't find one. So shall we have it stretched, it's called. And I said, yeah, that's a really good idea. It's a really good idea. So in my head, I've worked out how we're going to pay for it, what colour it's going to be, how we're going to furnish it, when it's going to happen, where it's going to happen. But for him, we have to have 17 more conversations about whether or not that is the right decision. But that's the point, is that I know that. And so actually, it's a bit like, you know, I'm sure your mum and dad do this with you, is I know how to get the best out of each of my 3 children, because I can manipulate, is the wrong word, but I can.
It is manipulating.
Yeah, it is actually, let's be honest. I can manipulate them and sometimes I forget and I try a technique on number 3 that is actually for number 1. It really doesn't work. It really backfires. And so for about 2 years, for example, I really felt that I've done with this house here and that I really wanted to move. And my husband was so resistant about it. And all my friends were saying, you okay? And I said, it's fine. I said, you know, we're just dropping in hints, and my children are dropping in hints. And I said, and when it becomes his idea, it will be done. And that's exactly what happened, almost to the ridiculous point that he decided, with the house was on the market 2 weeks later and it was sold 3 weeks after that.
Oh my God.
And I'm the one then going,
that was fast.
I wasn't ready.
It's a good relationship, you know.
It is quite funny. And of course the children all know him as well, and so they're rolling their eyes, and they're really clever with him too, and kind of gently steer him to what they know he really wants to do, but he just needs a little bit of help, really.
Yeah. Again, so it's like understanding what's going on, being aware, and then moving forward from there. Okay, last question. What advice would you give to someone who wants to have an extraordinary relationship?
I think it is realizing that, and I think this is life in general, and for women in general particularly, is that you don't have to do everything all at once. You know, what I see particularly now is that families, young couples, they want the perfect house, and they want to be able to go on foreign holidays, and they want the nice things, and they want to be able to eat out once a week, and they want the family, and they want the job, and they want the career, and I always say to women, you know, I'm 60 now, and the great thing about I have a podcast that I run called Radiant Menopause, and I interview women. One of the things that I do is I interview women. I say, what are the wins? What is it about being in your midlife, over 50 or over 60? What is it that you are really enjoying? And a lot of them say, I don't give a flying anymore about what other people think of me. I've realized that actually all I need to do is to satisfy my own needs and wants to be happy, and that I don't have to conform to anybody's idea of what I need to be. And that actually even really powerful women are saying, I wished I'd been more fully present with my children. I thought at the time that my career was present. It's been really interesting during lockdown that both men and women that I've been talking to have said, I didn't realise how little time I spent with my kids, and that the one thing that we've really enjoyed at being locked down is that I've really got to know them, and they've really got to know me. And I feel so blessed that my husband was prepared to sacrifice a lot and it was a sacrifice really and we made the decision together for me to largely be a stay-at-home mum, so that we could bring up our children in a kind of lockdown situation really. You know, lots of people say to us, aren't you lucky to have the children you've got? No. We worked hard at that. You know, we made some decisions about how we wanted to parent our children, and we learned along the way, and we did make mistakes mistakes and know it's, it's not been perfect for them, but we know we've done the best they can. And they are the ones that are saying to us, we're coming on holiday with you. We want you to move within 10 minutes of us. And so I think that says a lot, doesn't it?
Wow. Yeah. More than a lot.
So don't worry about it. I think we all, we worry about, I should be doing all of this. There's no should and could and would. It's actually enjoy that moment. Enjoy being in your 20s and being footloose and fancy free. Enjoy being in that wonderful relationship with your husband or your partner, or whatever it is. But equally, enjoy the motherhood thing without worrying that actually, because the relationship changes massively with your partner because your focus is on that. And it's very difficult for men. I think it is difficult for men to watch their women go through these changes of life. It's not the same for men, whatever you might say, or anybody else might say. These changes in the stages in our life in terms of how, if we have families particularly, they are compartmentalized, but also hormonally, we are at the beck and call of these things that are in charge of us. And even though we may fight against it, we cannot help this stuff that is happening to us, not only on a monthly basis, but also over our lifetime. And that you have to accept that things are going to change and that they're not going to get worse. They're just going to be different.
Yes, exactly. Thank you so much, Dr. Gill, for being here. Guys, go check her out at drgillbarham.com. She does lots of amazing stuff. I'm going to put all her links in the show notes. This was awesome, Dr. Gill. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. And I'm very grateful for, your time and to see your beautiful face. You do remind me of my youngest daughter, actually, Lydia.
Aw, thank you, Dr. Gill. Did you enjoy that episode? Could you do me a personal favor and subscribe and leave a review? It would mean a lot to me. Thank you so much and have an awesome day.